issues, notably in disaster resilience, disaster risk governance, technology and innovation, and protection, gender, and inclusion. May we please invite His Excellency Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Faisal Ibrahim, Minister of State, Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of National Development, Republic of Singapore, as the chair of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Disaster Management to deliver his opening remarks. Your Excellency, please.
Thank you. Excellencies from ASEAN member states and the ASEAN Secretariat, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning. It gives me great pleasure to deliver the opening remarks for the commemoration of ASEAN Day for Disaster Management, or ADDM. Singapore is honored to host today's commemoration event as the chair of AMDM and ACDM. These are extraordinary times. ASEAN and the world continues to adapt and find balance for a new normal. I'm heartened that we can still gather as one ASEAN with our esteemed partners. This is truly a reflection of ASEAN resilient spirit in disaster management. Against all odds, we strive to build back better after each disaster. In December 2004, the ASEAN ministers responsible for disaster management decided to commemorate the ADDM to secure and sustain participation of all stakeholders in disaster risk reduction activities. How in conjunction with the International Day for Disaster Reduction, it demonstrates ASEAN's commitment and efforts towards disaster reduction and management. This leads to an important end goal, that is to alleviate the hardship and suffering of peoples of ASEAN who live in one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world. Even with the ongoing pandemic, natural disasters remain unforgiving, battering the region with over 300 disaster events since last year, affecting over 16 million ASEAN people and causing over $250 million in damages. Globally, our vulnerabilities are unveiled when catastrophic natural disasters occur amid a crippling pandemic. This is why disaster management must be approached collectively, breaking away from conventional siloed response plans and linear strategies. While we continue to work towards a new normal, adapting to COVID-19, we must look beyond pandemic, focus on building enduring partnerships and finding innovative solutions for disaster management and that are in tandem with the dynamic pace of globalization. Hence, in line with this year's theme of strengthening partnership and innovation for disaster management in ASEAN, we will commemorate ADDM with a series of launches that will enable the region to chart the path towards realizing ASEAN Vision 2025. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to our partners from China, Japan, UN OCHA, UN SCAP, and UN Women for their steadfast support in enabling these initiatives. Let this event be the spark to ignite our energy and carry the momentum to create the future of a disaster-resilient ASEAN. We have an obligation to the peoples of ASEAN to be prepared and to overcome disasters as one ASEAN, one response. I look forward to launch, and I'm excited to embark on this transformation journey for ASEAN's disaster management with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite His Excellency Deng Xijin, Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to ASEAN, to deliver remarks to mark the launch of the ASEAN Disaster Resilience Outlook. Your Excellency, please.
Thank you. Your Excellency Datu Lin Jokhui, Secretary General of ASEAN. Your Excellency Muhammad Faisal Ibrahim, Minister of State of Singapore. Colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my great pleasure to attend the commemoration of the ASEAN Day for Disaster Management and witness the launch of the ASEAN Disaster Resilience Outlook. I will extend my warm congratulations to the launch on behalf of the Chinese mission to ASEAN. Based on the progress in the continuous implementation of the ASEAN Vision 2025 on disaster management over the past 6 years, the ADRO offers a comprehensive overview of achievements and challenges in disaster prevention and mitigation in ASEAN, covering such aspects as global and regional trends, ASEAN policy and strategy frameworks, institutionalization and communications, finance and resource mobilization, partnerships and innovations. The ADRO also puts forward targeted recommendations that will greatly inspire and guide regional efforts to enhance disaster management capacity and achieve the goal of one ASEAN, one response. China is proud to sponsor the ADRO through the ASEAN-China Cooperation Fund, and is more than happy to witness the official launch of this meaningful publication today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the drafting team and all experts from China and ASEAN countries for their hard work and wisdom. Dear colleagues, this year marks the 30th anniversary of China-ASEAN dialogue relations. Over the past 30 years, China-ASEAN strategic partnership has been significantly deepened and expanded, with fruitful results made in our cooperation in the 3 pillars, namely political and security, economic, and social cultural sectors. China and ASEAN have become the largest trading partners, the most productive cooperation partners, and the most dynamic strategic partners of each other. As both sides are prone to frequent natural disasters, China and ASEAN member states have maintained a close cooperation on disaster prevention, reduction, and relief over the years, and carried out a series of projects in experience and technology sharing, as well as human resource training. In 2013, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang announced at the 16th China-ASEAN Summit a grant of 50 million RMB to help with the implementation of the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response. Projects that are now in sound implementation are conducive to enhancing ASEAN's disaster management capacity. As many colleagues know, that the China-ASEAN Cooperation Mechanism on Disaster Management was inaugurated at the end of last year. Since then, both China and ASEAN have worked closely to graft out the structures, institutional building, and work plans of cooperation. And the first China-ASEAN ministerial meeting on disaster management will be convened this afternoon. It will be a landmark event for China and ASEAN, enabling us to map out the blueprint for future cooperation in disaster management, making it more than necessary and relevant to elevate our strategic partnership to a higher level. Colleagues, the COVID-19 pandemic reminds us once again of the growing complexity of the disaster risks in China and ASEAN countries. Challenges in disaster management remain daunting, and much more needs to be done in disaster early warning, supplies transportation, manpower allocation, information dissemination, and technology application, to name but a few. Thus, it is of greater urgency and significance for China and ASEAN to strengthen cooperation in this regard. China is ready to work with ASEAN and tap the full potential of the China-ASEAN Disaster Management Cooperation Mechanism, under the framework of which there is a lot China and ASEAN could and should do together. For instance, we could strengthen policy coordination, work on the emergency response to severe natural disasters, coordinate emergency humanitarian assistance, promote personnel exchanges, including mutual visits and training, as well as better apply digital technologies in disaster management. China is also willing to sponsor more capacity building projects through the ACCF and offer training courses under the ASEAN-China Young Leaders Scholarship. Dear colleagues, the 30th anniversary is milestone timing for China-ASEAN relations, which is advancing with greater steadiness, maturity, and momentum as well. At a new starting point, China-ASEAN cooperation is also blazing the new trail with disaster management as one of the spearheading sectors. I hope and believe that the ADRO will be a new symbol, opening up the fresh prospect of China-ASEAN cooperation in disaster management, cementing our shared commitment to enhance disaster response capacities region-wide, and contributing to the building of a closer China-ASEAN community with a shared future. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We are pleased to present the video of the ASEAN Disaster Resilient Outlook to mark the official launch of the publication.
Welcome to the launch of the ASEAN Disaster Resilience Outlook. As we continue the journey of enhancing ASEAN's disaster management, we continue to future-proof the region again. Before we take a peek into the future, let us understand why we need to start exploring exciting innovations and ideas now. Southeast Asia is one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world. Between 2019 and 2020, the region was hit by over 500 natural disasters, such as earthquakes, cyclones, and floods, a significant increase from previous years' reported 188 disasters. The COVID-19 outbreak highlighted the need for the humanitarian sector to reconsider its future planning, to be better prepared for a much more complex and uncertain future. To meet the increasingly uncertain and complex global context, strategic foresight and investment in future systems within the region are vital for ASEAN's continued success. To prepare and propel ASEAN for the future towards the aim of resilient ASEAN by 2025 and beyond, the ADRO will delve into discussions on the following 4 key strategic themes. Let us now fast forward to preview the future of ASEAN's disaster management. Institutionalization and communications. We have to leverage and formalize a network of supportive research institutes and think tanks in ASEAN, raising awareness and empowering communities to develop preparedness strategies and comprehensive resilience and prosperity across ASEAN by 2035. The future belongs to the next generation. Therefore, we must explore new and effective ways to engage the leaders of tomorrow and sensitize them to the ever-challenging disasters that they would have to face in the future. Finance and resource mobilization. Disaster risk financing is crucial for ASEAN's efforts to strengthen disaster resilience in the region. Existing studies suggest that every $1 spent in disaster risk reduction can save $4 to $7 in response. The recent COVID-19 has also taught us to rethink conventional deployment during complex scenarios. We can no longer take for granted that external resources will be mobilized based on past default arrangements. Partnerships and innovations. Successful partnerships are critical to ensuring effective disaster management and emergency response. Engaging affected populations to ensure inclusivity in planning, implementation, monitoring, and appraisal of policies for a resilient ASEAN. In the current world of electric cars, robots, and artificial intelligence, we are also open to infinite opportunities to leverage on innovations that can potentially transform disaster management for the better. Last but not least, anticipatory action in the complex riskscape. As a global citizen, ASEAN must adopt an anticipatory approach in the new complex riskscape. We simply cannot work alone and approach disaster management in a linear fashion, applying traditional solutions in the face of new challenges such as pandemics, climate change, and urbanization. Are you ready to dive into the exciting future of disaster management through the ASEAN Disaster Resilience Outlook? Let us continue the spirit of One ASEAN, One Response, innovating and transforming a resilient ASEAN together.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite His Excellency Chiba Akira, Ambassador of Japan to ASEAN, to deliver remarks to mark the launch of the ASEAN Mapping Exercise to promote synergy with other relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies, ASEAN centers, and entities associated with ASEAN on disaster management, and the web-based monitoring and evaluation system for the ADMIR Work Program 2021-2025. Your Excellency, please.
Good morning, His Excellency Dato Lim Jok Hoi, Secretary General of the ASEAN Secretariat, His Excellency Minister Shamungam, Minister for Home Affairs and for Law of the Republic of Singapore, Chair of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Disaster Management. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Government of Japan, I'd like to extend my heartfelt congratulations on the commemoration of ASEAN Day of Disaster Management under the unprecedented situation of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to express my appreciation to Singapore, the AMMDM chair, in its efforts to bringing the commemoration ceremony into fruition. For nearly 50 years, Japan and ASEAN have been working closely together for the peace, stability, and development, prosperity of the region. In 2005, at the Japan-ASEAN Summit meeting, then Prime Minister Koizumi announced a contribution of approximately $70 million to support ASEAN's efforts to promote integration towards the establishment of ASEAN community. Then the Japan-ASEAN Integration Fund, or JAIF, was established in March 2006. Furthermore, in 2013, which marked the 40th anniversary of Japan-ASEAN Friendship and Cooperation, Prime Minister Abe announced an additional $100 million contribution as JAIF 2.0. JAIF has been contributing to Japan-ASEAN cooperation in a wide range of fields. Particularly in the area of disaster management, we have been promoting cooperation through the capacity building of the AHA Center for years through JAIF. The 2013 ASEAN-Japan Special Summit meeting reiterated the need for cooperation in disaster management and committed to a package to strengthen Japan-ASEAN cooperation in disaster management by focusing on expanding the network of disaster management with ASEAN, conducting dialogue on disaster management, and strengthening cooperation in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief among disaster management authorities. It is my great pleasure to have the first ASEAN-Japan ministerial meeting on disaster management today. As ASEAN and Japan are prone to natural disasters, disaster management is a common issue between us. We believe that it is important to continue to promote cooperation as a partner for a better life. ASEAN mapping exercise to promote synergy with other relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies and entities associated with ASEAN on disaster management, supported by JIVE, aims to promote synergy between relevant ASEAN sectorial bodies on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, HADR. This is necessary to implement the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, AADMER Work Program 2021-2025, another project supported by JIVE. Japan believes that this is a meaningful project which contributes to One ASEAN, One Response, as well as ASEAN centrality, as reflected in the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, or AOIP. Of all relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies and entities associated with ASEAN, it will be presented at this commemorative first AMMDM plus Japan. The report will be developed into action plans at the Joint Task Force to promote synergy with other relevant ASEAN bodies on HADR this month. I hope that disaster management and emergency response in the ASEAN region will become further responsive and effective based on these action plans. Japan has also supported the development of a web-based monitoring evaluation M&E system for the AADMER Work Program 2021-2025 through JIVE to ensure steady implementation thereof. The web-based M&E system provides a systematic process for the collection, analysis, and reporting of monitoring data to track progress in the mobilization of resources and the completion of activities in order to provide evidence of priority outputs on the expected outcomes and impact of the AADMER Work Program 2021-2025. I am pleased that this M&E system will be launched at this first AMMDM plus Japan. I hope that the AAMDER Work Program 2021-2025 will be further steadily implemented under the results-based monitoring by the web-based M&E. We recognize the great importance of deepening the strategic relationship between Japan and ASEAN through these efforts related to disaster management. We will make use of our knowledge and experience to contribute to the creation of a further disaster-resistant region. In just 2 years' time, Japan and ASEAN will celebrate the 50th anniversary of their friendship and cooperation. I hope that our relations will be even closer in the future. Japan would like to further promote cooperation with ASEAN in a wide range of fields, including disaster management. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We are pleased to present the video of the ASEAN Mapping Exercise Report to mark the official launch of the report.
Welcome to the launch of the ASEAN Mapping Exercise Report to promote synergy with other relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies, centers, and entities associated with ASEAN on disaster management. In the last decade, ASEAN has endeavored to promote integrated and coordinated efforts and synergy among various sectors in advancing disaster management in the region. To this end, in 2014, a joint task force to promote synergy with other relevant ASEAN bodies on humanitarian assistance and disaster relief was established. To date, 60 meetings on the JTF on HADR have been conducted to promote the synergy. Fast forward to 2021 and the future. The ASEAN region is facing a complex risk landscape. ASEAN has to deal with fast onset disasters such as earthquakes or tsunami, and also slow onset disasters such as sea level rise and droughts. More extreme weather events are expected due to the climate change. ASEAN also has to cope with the pandemic, human-induced disasters, and possible technological disasters in the future. Given the rapid evolution of disaster risks in the region and the importance of further enhancing synergy among various sectors in addressing the risks, a mapping exercise has been conducted to comprehensively identify roles played by various sectors in disaster management in the region and recommend strategies to strengthen the JTF on the HADR platform to promote a whole-of-ASEAN approach towards supporting disaster management and greater resilience. The mapping exercise has mapped out the current and potential roles of these sectoral bodies, centers, and entities in advancing disaster management in the region. Upon a series of consultations with various stakeholders, the mapping exercise recommended the following actions to rejuvenate the current JTF on HADR. Rebranding the JTF on HADR into the biannual ASEAN Disaster Resilience Platform and biannual ASEAN Disaster Resilience Forum. Expanding the scope to cover all phases in disaster management, including prevention and mitigation, preparedness and disaster emergency response, and recovery. Expanding participation beyond traditional stakeholders to include as many as possible relevant ASEAN sectoral bodies, centers and entities, as well as ASEAN partners and friends. Refocusing the meetings and deliberations to cover planning on joint activities, resource mobilization, and addressing pressing and emerging issues on disaster management. Developing sound communication strategy to promote awareness within and beyond ASEAN. Showcasing ASEAN global leadership in disaster management. As we always strive to be more anticipatory, forward-looking, and adaptive to deal with future complexities and system global risks, let us collaborate and stand strong as one ASEAN. We are ready to be the global leader in disaster management.
We are pleased to present the video of the web-based monitoring and evaluation system for the ADMER Work Program 2021 to 2025 to mark the official launch of the report.
Welcome to the ADMER Work Program 2021 to 2025 Web-Based Monitoring and Evaluation System. The ASEAN endeavors to be the global leader in disasters management. The ADMER Work Program 2021 to 2025 is developed to set the chart for disaster management for the next 5 years. It has 5 priority programs, 30 outcomes expected, and 117 outputs to be implemented until 2025. The AWP 2021 to 2025 aims to achieve these impacts. 1. Reduce disaster losses in lives and in the social, economic, and environmental assets of communities and ASEAN member states. And 2. Institutionalize joint regional disaster management and emergency response in ASEAN. With this web-based monitoring and evaluation or M&E system, ASEAN member states can have access to near real-time monitoring data that informs and guides the ADMER Work Program implementation. The M&E system allows partners of ASEAN and general public to keep abreast with the progress and achievement of the AWP 2021 to 2025. The first key feature of the M&E system is the implementation monitoring dashboards. The dashboard provides quick insight into the status of AWP implementation, such as percentage and number of output being implemented under each priority program. The second key feature of the M&E system is the results monitoring dashboards. It consists of impact monitoring dashboard and outcome monitoring dashboard. Outcome monitoring dashboard provide insight on the progress of key performance indicators that demonstrate the achievement of outcomes against key performance indicators. Impact monitoring dashboard shows the achievement of the AWP measured by several key performance indicators, contributing to the long-term impact of ASEAN in reducing disaster loss and strengthening joint disaster management. The third key feature of the M&E system is the partnership dashboard. The dashboard provides information on the partnership established and resource mobilized. The web-based M&E system is a secured online platform that is available at the fingertips of ASEAN disaster management stakeholders. ASEAN partners, UN agencies, civil societies, academia, the private sector, and the people of ASEAN can always be informed of the progress in ASEAN's resilience building and make informed decisions for nurturing and enhancing collaboration with ASEAN. Through the ADMIR Work Program 2021 to 2025 web-based M&E system, let's witness the realization of One ASEAN, One Response and communicate the achievement of ASEAN as a global leader in disaster management. Visit www.mneawp.asean.org now.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a recorded video remarks from Mr. Ramesh Rajasingham, Acting Assistant Secretary General of UN OCHA, to deliver remarks to mark the launch of the ASEAN-UN Joint Strategic Plan of Action on Disaster Management 2021 to 2025.
His Excellency K. Shanmugam, Minister for Home Affairs and Minister for Law of the Republic of Singapore, and Chair of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Disaster Management. His Excellency Dato Lim Jock Hoi, Secretary General of the Association of Southeast Nations, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all. It is a pleasure and an honor to join you on the commemoration of the ASEAN Day for Disaster Management and the launching of the ASEAN-UN Joint Strategic Plan of Action on Disaster Management for 2021 to 2025. What we are launching today is an essential document. It sets out ASEAN's and the UN's shared understanding, mutual commitments, intentions, and activities to work together in the areas of risk mitigation, preparedness, disaster response, and early recovery, so that we can ensure the ASEAN region is as resilient and as able to respond to disasters as possible. This is the fourth iteration of the Joint Plan of Action. As such, it draws on the lessons learned and the experience gained from the three previous plans. The Joint Plan of Action is also closely aligned with and guided by the work of the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response over the next 5 years, as well as other global humanitarian priorities. It reflects the changing disaster management landscape, including the foreseen impact of the climate crisis and the new way of functioning as a result of the pandemic. The plan recognizes the importance of a people-centered approach, as well as the need to engage communities, local entities, and a diverse group of key actors, which is critical for any response during a disaster. I'm confident that the plan, once implemented, will support the ASEAN Community Vision for 2025. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all the ASEAN and the UN colleagues who worked together to develop this plan. From the UN, 16 entities will support the plan's implementation. This high number demonstrates not only the United Nations' commitment to the ASEAN region and its people, but also the UN's dedication to mitigate, tackle, and respond to the impact of climate change and disaster events. I thank all these UN agencies for their support. I want to convey a special thank you also to those UN agencies that are leading a priority area within the Joint Plan of Action. These include SCAP, leading the work under the Risk Assessment and Monitoring Priority Program, UNDP, which leads the Resilient Recovery Priority Program, UNDRR, leading the Prevention and Mitigation Priority Program, and WFP, the World Food Program, which leads the Preparedness and Response Priority Program. I'm also grateful for the work of my OCHA colleagues in leading the Global Leadership priority program, and who serve in our role as convener of UN entities in the area of disaster management. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the launch of the joint plan on the ASEAN Day for Disaster Management is timely, as the theme of this year's commemoration is strengthening partnerships and innovation for disaster management in the ASEAN. The recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change clearly describes the transboundary nature of the impact of climate crisis and the challenges that the world will face in the next decades. As we have seen during the pandemic, partnerships across organizations, communities, countries, regions, and indeed the world have been critical in helping affected people. A strong response depends on acting together to ease suffering, whether it is because of climate-related disasters, food insecurity, discrimination, or whenever people are forced to move. Finally, let us also take this opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to support the most vulnerable people who are affected by crises. We must continue to work together to help make the ASEAN community and the region more disaster resilient. We must continue to work together to make the world safer, a place where our children and future generations can live safe, prosperous, healthy, and peaceful lives. I thank you once again for our continued cooperation, and I wish you a happy ASEAN Day for Disaster Management. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a recorded video remarks from His Excellency Armida Salcia Ali Shabana, Executive Secretary of UNESCO, to mark the launch of the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on Adaptation to Drought 2021 to 2025. Your Excellency, please.
Your Excellency, Mr. Shanmugam, Minister for Home Affairs and Law, Singapore, and Chair of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Disaster Management. Your Excellency, Mr. Dato Lim Jock Hoi, Secretary General of ASEAN, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to join you at the commemoration of ASEAN Day of Disaster Management in strengthening partnership and innovation for disaster management in ASEAN, to launch the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action for Adaptation to Drought. I sincerely thank the Honorable Minister of Singapore for the kind invitation. I also express my appreciation to His Excellency Dato Lim Jock Hoi for the productive partnership between ESCAP and ASEAN Secretariat in the service of our common membership. Building resilience to drought requires multidisciplinary and inter-country cooperation, which can be delivered more effectively through institutional collaboration. Southeast Asia remains exposed to a high frequency and intensity of droughts. The slow onset nature of drought provides a significant opportunity to prepare for these events, and proactive rather than reactive policy responses can significantly mitigate human suffering. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, ESCAP's 2021 edition of our flagship Asia-Pacific Disaster Report highlights that 110 million people are exposed to drought and the biological hazards related to it in Southeast Asia. Currently, 5 of the 10 ASEAN member states have more than 30% of the total employed population working in the agricultural sector. In these circumstances, drought can have severe impacts on people, the economy, and the environment, thus emphasizing the need to boost the capacity of ASEAN member states to build resilience to drought. As part of the effort to mobilize region-wide action, the ASEAN and ESCAP secretariats have jointly produced the Ready for the Dry Years publication series, which advocates for a paradigm shift towards more proactive drought management across Southeast Asia. The series reveals how the region is likely to see a geographical shift in drought and their severities, and provides policy recommendations for strengthening drought adaptation through regional cooperation. It provides compelling evidence as to why adaptation to drought should remain high on the policy agenda. Risk-informed measures need to be adopted that strengthen our institutions, sectors, and people's adaptive capacity to the cyclical and slow-onset nature of drought. Supported by these policy recommendations, the ASEAN Declaration on the Strengthening of Adaptation to Drought, adopted at the 37th ASEAN Summit in November 2020, called for the development of the ASEAN Regional Plan of Action for Adaptation to Drought. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, moving on to more proactive drought management will be essential for protecting development gains in the coming years. It must be a key component of COVID-19 recovery and building back better with resilience. The ASEAN Regional Plan of Action for Adaptation to Drought, launched today, is a needs-driven blueprint to enhance coordinated responses. It provides 9 actions advocating for policies along 3 tracks: reduce and prevent, prepare and respond, and restore and recover. Concrete areas of work identified in this document offer opportunities to translate strategic contributions into solutions for collective action. I hope this document will prove to be a useful guide for national and regional strategic actions. ESCAP stands ready to continue to support the ASEAN region in enhancing its adaptation to drought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We are pleased to present the video of the Regional Plan of Action to mark the launch of the publication.
Water is essential to life on Earth. So when an entire region is consumed by drought, the consequences can be catastrophic. In Southeast Asia, the last 2 decades have seen an increase in the frequency, severity, and the magnitude of drought events. Up to 1/4 of the region's population lives in a drought hotspot, and with climate change set to exacerbate extreme weather events in the future, droughts like these will only get worse. ASEAN, supported by the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, is proud to launch its Regional Plan of Action for Adaptation to Drought for 2021 to 2025. This plan aims to ready the region for a new climate paradigm by recommending 9 actions and 26 sub-actions that broadly aim to reduce and prevent drought risk, prepare and respond to drought impacts, and restore and recover from drought. Action 1. Risk, Impact and Vulnerability Assessment. This aims to assess past, present, and potential risks of drought on Southeast Asian economies, environments, and societies, and to mitigate these effects. Action 2. Early Warning System, Preparedness, and Planning. The objective here is to enhance regional and national drought monitoring, forecasting, and early warning systems. Action 3. Adaptation. This aims to reduce drought risk, mitigate impacts, and strengthen resilience among vulnerable groups and stakeholders. Action 4. Response and recovery. The focus here is on post-drought relief, financial assistance, and technical support to help communities recover from drought. Action 5. Strengthening coordination between ASEAN sectoral bodies. This bolsters coordination and communication networks among ASEAN bodies to better implement policy goals. Action 6. Partnership and collaboration with non-ASEAN partners. This encourages the exchange of knowledge about drought monitoring and forecasting among non-ASEAN organizations. Action 7. Capacity building. This aims to strengthen coordination at the regional level for achieving sustainable management of drought in the ASEAN region.
Action 8. Data sharing and dissemination. The goal here is to enhance and develop drought information sharing. Action 9. Monitoring and evaluation. This final action focuses on monitoring how the overall regional plan of action is being implemented to ensure effective execution. Many of the impacts of drought are transboundary, and no country is spared. The success of the Regional Plan of Action for Adaptation to Drought relies on the close cooperation and coordination of ASEAN sectoral bodies and national agencies to implement the 9 recommended actions. To adapt to the droughts of the future, the people of Southeast Asia must work together. Collectively, we need to be ready for the dry years ahead.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite Mr. Muhammad Nasiri, UN Women Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, to deliver remark to mark the launch of the ASEAN Regional Framework on Protection, Gender and Inclusion, and Disaster Management for 2021 to 2025. Mr. Nasiri, please.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Dr. Muhammad Faisal Ibrahim, Minister of State, Singapore, Republic of Singapore. Your Excellency Deng Jirun, Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to ASEAN. Your Excellency Chiba Akira, Ambassador of Japan to ASEAN. Your Excellency Dato Lim Jokhoi, Secretary General of ASEAN. Distinguished delegates, a very good morning to all of you. We are honored to be here for the commemoration of the ASEAN Day of Disaster Management. Heartfelt congratulations to ASEAN for the launch of the landmark ASEAN Disaster Resilience Outlook, ASEAN Mapping Exercise, and the web-based monitoring and evaluation system. I would like to also celebrate the joint UN-ASEAN efforts in developing the Joint Strategic Plan of Action on Disaster Management, Regional Plan of Action on Drought, and the Regional Framework on Protection, Gender and Inclusion in Disaster Management 2021-2025. All of which will translate ASEAN's commitments on disaster management and emergency response into action. The theme of this year's commemoration, Strengthening Partnerships and Innovation for Disaster Management in ASEAN, has never been more timely. In the face of multiplying disaster risk and the pandemic that have exacerbated inequalities and vulnerabilities, multilateral cooperation is key to address the challenge. This is precisely why we greatly appreciate your strong partnership with ASEAN over the past decade. Together, we have advanced gender mainstreaming into many ASEAN sectoral priorities, especially in disaster management. Since the signing of the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, ADME, in 2009, ASEAN has come a long way in reducing disaster risk. Looking across the Asia-Pacific, the average number of lives lost to natural hazards has dropped significantly in the past 2 years compared to the past decade as a whole. However, to accelerate the progress towards sustainable development, ASEAN will need stronger targeted actions to reach the most vulnerable. This includes women, children, youth, persons with disabilities, and the elderly, among other marginalized groups. Under the ADME Work Program 2021-2025, ASEAN has been leading the way in integrating gender and social inclusion. To translate this into measurable action, UN Women is very proud to support ASEAN in establishing the Technical Working Group on Protection, Gender and Inclusion that brought the ACDM together with the ACW, SOM-SWD, and the AHA Center. Today's launch of the Regional Framework on Protection, Gender and Inclusion, or PGI, in disaster management is the testament of this effort. The framework breaks new ground in ASEAN's journey towards more effective, inclusive disaster risk reduction. This is where the innovation comes in. It also provides a global example of how regional bodies and cooperation can accelerate action towards shared goals of gender equality and ending gender-based violence in disasters. The adoption of the 28 target actions in the framework, especially to institutionalize the leadership of those most impacted by disasters, is critically important for the region to build back better from the pandemic. Drawing on the lessons learned across the region, the regional framework also presents key entry points for national disaster management organizations to engage gender machineries, social welfare actors, and key stakeholders for greater coherent and coordinated actions. This mirrors the effort at the regional level for cross-sectoral collaboration. Finally, we must emphasize that none of this would have been possible without the strong leadership of the ACDM Prevention and Mitigation co-chairs and the strong support of the ASEAN Secretariat. We would also like to thank the European Civil Protection and Humanitarian Aid Operations for their generous support for this initiative and for all of the trust in partnership with UN Women. Excellencies, distinguished guests. We stand ready to continue to be part of this historic journey with ASEAN to operationalize one ASEAN, one response. This is a critical step to enhance the speed, scale, quality, and preparedness and response. We sincerely hope that the regional framework on protection, gender, and inclusion will provide a practical tool for ASEAN to ensure greater inclusivity and responsiveness to the needs of women, children, youth, the elderly, people living with disabilities, as well as other vulnerable, marginalized populations. We trust that this will contribute to the ASEAN Vision 2025 and the people-centered ASEAN community that leaves no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are pleased to present the video of the ASEAN Regional Framework on Protection, Gender and Inclusion in Disaster Management to mark the launch of the framework.
Southeast Asians are facing increasing risks of disasters, typhoons, floods, droughts, and earthquakes. These are occurring more frequently with higher intensity and present greater impacts to vulnerable populations. Women face higher risks of gender-based violence and loss of lives. Children, youth, elderly, the poor, and persons with disabilities have distinct vulnerabilities that shape the way they experience and recover from disasters. Today, the COVID-19 pandemic is deepening pre-existing inequalities. The empowerment of vulnerable groups is critical for a more inclusive response. The ADMIR work program recognizes the key roles and unique needs of those most affected by disasters. This year, ASEAN established a technical working group on protection, gender, and inclusion. Together with partners, ASEAN aims to take a whole-of-society approach to disaster management. A disaster-resilient ASEAN needs a shared vision for inclusion. The ASEAN Regional Framework guides member states to implement targeted actions on protection, gender, and inclusion at regional level, and equips them with tools for country-specific interventions. This framework is crucial for ensuring coordinated and cross-sectorial action for a more inclusive, sustainable, and resilient ASEAN community. Together as one ASEAN,
Distinguished delegates, a very good morning and selamat pagi. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Singapore as the host and all ASEAN member states for joining the commemoration of the ASEAN Day for Disasters Management 2021. Annually on this day, we gather to renew our commitment towards realizing a disaster-resilient ASEAN. This year, we are heartened to share the occasion with the esteemed partners and guests who have played a role in building the shared vision together. In the spirit of the theme for ADMM this year, strengthening partnership and innovation for disasters management in ASEAN, we celebrate your presence today as we recognize the importance of collective action. We have witnessed today the remarkable progress that has been made through partnering and innovation. As we embark on the implementation of the ADMIA Work Program 2021-2025, we are capitalizing on new technologies to chart our progress through the web-based monitoring and evaluation system, which will ensure that ASEAN is on the track towards meeting the goals of the 5 years plan. On this note, I will welcome the finalization of key documents this year that will further enhance our cooperation in disasters management. This includes the launch of A1 ASEAN Regional Plan of Action on adaptation to drought 2021-2025, which adopts an all hazards approach and call for cooperation with other relevant sectoral bodies and broader stakeholders. Second, the ASEAN Framework on Protection, Gender and Inclusion 2021-2025 to ensure that our vulnerable communities are protected and call for an inclusive approach in disasters management. And third, the ASEAN UN Joint Strategic Plan of Action in Disasters Management 2021-2025 in an effort to harmonize ASEAN and UN frameworks in supporting disasters management through co-action. Looking ahead, that the ASEAN Disaster Resilience Outlook adopts a horizontal scanning frame to anticipate the changing risk landscape and recommends anticipatory, adapted, and innovation strategy in disasters management, while the ASEAN mapping exercise synergizes and strengthens ASEAN mechanism and instruments for a whole of ASEAN approach to disasters management. These hallmark deliverables launched under Singapore's chairmanship are both timely and critical investment that will reap dividends for our future generations. I congratulate Singapore for the able chairmanship and all ASEAN member states for a productive 2021. Most importantly, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our valuable partners, especially China, Japan, UN OCHA, UN ASCAP, and UN Women, all of whom have been a reliable source of support to ASEAN throughout these challenging years. I look forward to your continued partnership in disasters management in the years ahead. May we join hands in building a sustainable and disaster resilient ASEAN community together. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. This marks the end of the commemoration of ASEAN Day for Disaster Management. We appreciate your participation today and thank you.